Welcome back to season 2 of Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. I am your host, Marcia Blaine, a licensed professional counselor, a clinical hypnotherapist, an author, motivator, and life coach. Join us during this season as we begin to normalize freedom. Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. Welcome back to Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. I am elated. Y'all know how I feel about my guest, Mr. Dr. Brian Clardy. I met him 30 some odd years, almost 36 years ago at the University of Tennessee at Martin. And I just watched his journey. So let me jump into his bio. So to give you all some history so you know where we're going. I just need you all to understand it's about to be deep. We're going to hit. Y'all may be a little mad because you may, get into a place where you really are historically disrupted by some information, and then we move on. So Dr. Brian Keith Clardy is an associate professor of history at Murray State University in Murray, Kentucky. He holds a bachelor's of arts degree in political science from the University of Tennessee at Martin, a master of public administration degree from Murray State University, and he earned his Doctor of Philosophy degree in historical studies from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale in 1990. He authored a book entitled The Management of Dissent, a responses to the post-Kent State protests at 7 public universities in Illinois, and A Testament of Grace, Sermons and Reflections. Dr. Clardy was a Henry Salvatori Fellow with the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 97. He has published multiple works. You all have to go out there and get them, but in the Journal of Business and Economic Perspectives, the Tennessee Historical Quarterly, the Journal of Church and State, the Flinders Journal of History and Politics, the Papers of West Tennessee Historical Papers, and the Journal of Jackson Purchase Historical Society. In 2017, Dr. Clardy received the Marcia Wingfield Award from West Tennessee Historical Society for his work at Westgate, correspondence of Congressman Ed Jones. He received the Lonnie Mans Award from the Jackson Purchase Historical Society for his historiographical essay on lynching in the United States. He has an upcoming article in the Tennessee Historical Quarterly about Senator Robert Kennedy's 1968 presidential campaign and Kennedy's speech to the 1968 Impact Symposium at the University of Vanderbilt University. He married Sheila Neely Clardy, and they are active members of St. John's Episcopal Church. And he is the son to Mrs. Ginger Clardy, and Dr. George Clardy of Clarksville, Tennessee. He sits on a lot of boards. He attends so many historical sessions, very active in the political arena. Listen, he often say, I love being a nerd, but our truth is we need you. We need you to educate us really on historical foundations and principles, because a lot of times we are making decisions outside of the facts. We're making decisions about life changes and things like that without really understanding a historical perspective. So thank you, Dr. Clardy. I get to call you Brian because I knew
yes,
you before
do.
you were.
That's right. That's right. And thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to jump into it now. One of your 2 areas that I believe are your niche areas, that's religion and history, political history, and just history overall. We know that right now in our beautiful country, we have a lot of people abusing the thought of religion, the institution of religion, historical components such as the Second Amendment. Most people don't even know what the Second Amendment says. or
I
why
don't
it
think
was
the
even
NRA
put in
does
place.
either, but anyway.
And honestly, they don't.
Right.
In my opinion, I believe that fear, the message of fear of the Second Amendment and the rights of bearing arms is so displaced. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, down through the last couple of centuries, a lot of Americans have had this fascination with the gun and this
Mhm.
fascination with the power that the gun yields. I think that many Americans took Chairman Mao's statement literally, that only real power comes from the barrel of a gun. And a lot of people
Mm.
seem to believe that. And we're seeing now almost on a daily basis this spree of violence that's happening. It just happened in Texas overnight. A family of
Saw
five
that.
were murdered by a guy who had been drinking and had been firing his weapon, an AR-15, as a matter of fact.
And
And
they just simply asked him
it
not to
just
do it in the front yard.
exactly, this is becoming the new normal. And this worship of the gun and this worship of this distorted view of the Second Amendment and this toxic masculinity, now we're paying
Mhm.
the bad dividends of that. And it is tragic.
Yeah.
It can happen anywhere, it can happen anytime, and Americans are rightfully on edge. Plus, you add to that bad religion, bad theology, Christian nationalism. It's a
Mm.
very unhealthy mix that's going on in this country right now.
Yeah, the recipe um, that's happening right now, all the ingredients that are in the pot definitely is making for a bad meal. It's
Yes,
not consumable, right?
that's right.
Because you have the fear of losing the role of Christianity. We're going to talk about that because I really need people to understand Christianity was not the first religion. That's number one.
At all.
Jesus was never a Christian. Number
That's
two,
right. Mm-hmm.
Christianity is one of the younger religions out here. So
Mm-hmm.
when we
That's
put
right.
all that together, you have a lot of people running around with a lack of information,
Right.
and they're taking people like MTG as if they're scholars. That
Mm-hmm.
lady is just on a whole nother place,
That's scary.
and they're not. And so, in the wake of historical context, can you break down why do you think religion has become a focus here in America that's leading to the mass destruction?
Well, the common myth about America's origins is that the English settlers came here in search of religious freedom. Within the context of maybe the Massachusetts Bay Colony, maybe Plymouth, that had something to do with it, but that's completely false. If you look at the establishment of the southern states, like Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, New York, which was at first New Amsterdam, New Netherland, religion was at the very, very, very bottom of that. We were
Bottom.
talking about people wanting to own land, own resources, because land ownership over in the old country was very limited to the very elites and so forth. And so you have these folks coming over from Europe who wanted to be part of that new aristocracy. So they came to
Yeah.
this hemisphere by choice and for profit, and to own land and have resources. And they
Mm-hmm.
used religion as a cover. And sad to
Mm.
say, if you look at what happened even in Massachusetts, in places like Salem, that distortion of religion led to the deaths of several people during the Salem witchcraft trials in the 1690s. And so
Right.
I don't buy this idea, and never have really, that America is a
Mm-hmm.
Christian nation. Had America truly been a Christian nation, The genocide of the Native American would never have happened. The enslavement of the African would never have happened. The exploitation of women and the poor would never have happened. So no, I don't buy this idea of about America being such a religious society, and it's being used now in a very deadly way
Yes.
to limit women's choices, reproductive choices. It's used now to beat up on the LGBTQ community. It's used now to justify this nouveau racism. You just cited Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's just one of several people now that's pushing the new Jim Crow under the guise of Christian nationalism. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where this is headed, but I know that no good's going to come from it.
No good. And oftentimes I'm watching your post on Facebook and Instagram, and what it's doing for me is confirming what I'm feeling, right? Because I recognize that a lot of people haven't intellectualized religion. They went through the process of this is how mom and daddy said it was supposed to be. This is what the preacher said it's supposed to be.
Right.
But I remember having a conversation with someone who said to me, you and I can't talk religion. And I said, why? And her response was, you study. I was taken aback
Yeah.
because how is it that you, and tell me your thoughts on this, how is it that you have people sitting in positions of Trump talked about Christianity, but we know dude is not going to nobody's church. He's not using any kind of wisdom. There's none of that. How is it that it's okay to become so aggressive and judgmental from a religious perspective and you never study? What are your thoughts about that?
The problem I have with, and you're exactly right, people's views on religion and faith come basically from their parents and from their larger communities, and ideas of faith, of course, are transmitted generationally. That's true until somebody decides they're going to do some serious thinking and raise some of those uncomfortable questions.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Christianity being a very new religion. That's very true. It
Mm-hmm.
was an offshoot of Judaism. And
Yeah.
a lot of what passes for Christianity comes from the very, very narrow writings of Paul. And it's even doubtful that Paul wrote all of those particular letters. And so we're looking at Pauline Christianity. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, Paul excused a whole lot of bad stuff, slavery, the treatment of women, his very narrow views on morality. Paul was very pompous, Paul was very pretentious, and his views on faith have shaped discourse over the last 2,000 years. And so
Uh-huh.
this is why we have to do some extra study. This is why we have to go back and look at the environment in which Christianity was created, from Second Temple Judaism and all the things that were going on with the temple, with the Essenes, with the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and so forth. Look at the fact that they were under Roman occupation, and then
Yes.
try to, as best as possible, contextualize the words of Jesus from those particular periods, because Jesus spoke more of how we treat the poor and spoke more about oppression than he ever did these garden variety things that we call sins.
Right. Right. And
Jesus hung
that's what
out with the poor. He hung out with the so-called dregs of society, and taught us this idea of unconditional love, and that nobody is better than anyone else. And that's what
absolutely.
got him killed.
Speak that truth. I tell people all the time, listen, if you want to be Christ-like, then you're gonna have to do what Christ did. He didn't care anything about these church folks with the right handkerchiefs and the right clothing to wear. What he cared about was those that were destitute and that were being forgotten. What he
Because
cared
he came
about,
from that.
he came from it. And so he correlated it with it, and he was never pompous. He was never pompous.
At
And
all.
and and so when you have people standing in the pulpit guiding people through fear, because that's all it
That's
is.
all it is.
It's just fear. So you're guiding these people through fear. Now you have people running out doing mass shootings, insane. Now, this is what triggers me when you lie and say it's mental health. No, it's not a mental health crisis. You are operating in your fear, and your fear is being stroked by people with full power because they know that they can manipulate the masses. This thing, even here's a manipulative point that I've been seeing. Christians getting upset at people for calling the universe, and they become offended because they're not saying God or Jesus. Help me out. Help the audience out. Why is that such a big thing?
Because a lot of Christians, at least some of the ones I know, cannot think beyond this planet and this solar system.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of solar systems and planets and stars out there that no matter
Galaxies.
how advanced we are technologically, we will never see them all. We will never visit them all. And so we have to look at ourselves here on Earth as part of something larger.
Yes.
And most folks cannot do that.
Mm.
And that's the scary part.
That is scary. I remember, and I know you follow me on social media platforms, so I know you remember when I posted about me doing hypnotherapy.
Right.
And someone came into my inbox and said, "So you just giving up on God?"
Oh.
And my petty response was, when you have a relationship the way I do with the Creator, come and have a conversation with me. You can't read 2 sentences in the Bible and break it down. When you get to that point, and I said to her, I said, I eat meat. You're still supping on baby food. I've been a meat eater a long time. I literally sit down and go through so many different things to make sure I understand. And so I asked him, I said, when was the last time you literally broke a scripture down? Well, that's what the preacher's for. When you can do that, come to me. And it's so amazing, the closed-mindedness.
I made sure last year that I had a copy. I ordered it last summer because I was going to buy one 20 some odd years ago and I passed on it, but I ended up buying a copy of the Septuagint. And that's a very, very important text because we're talking about the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek. And part of the preacher and the pastor's job should be to go through the sacred text and dig out the original languages, be it Greek, be it Aramaic, be it Hebrew, and to really, really wrestle with the text and try to contextualize it, put it within the context of history, and make those practical applications, and then on Sunday present that to the people.
Yeah.
But what you have are a lot of preachers who will bite off of what other preachers on television have said, and will plagiarize a T.D. Jakes or plagiarize a Joel Osteen and throw a little bit of rap and rhyme in it that has no substance. And then they'll stand up there in the pulpit on Sunday and preach to people who are just as blind as they are, and give it some entertainment value. That's not worship.
It's not
True
at all.
worship is actually wrestling with the text, wrestling with those uncomfortable questions. And this idea that you can't question God, oh, yes, you should.
Oh, yes, you should. Yes,
Definitely.
you should.
If you believe that God is such a big entity and such a big creator, and God has been around for millions of years in eternity past and will be around millions of years in eternity future, do you honestly think God is going to be threatened by your little bit of doubts?
Listen, and that's so powerful. It's simple things like the word perfect. You know, we live under this umbrella of perfection. And so I often tell my clients as a therapist, you do know that perfection is no such thing. The word perfect simply means in its original form to complete. When you understand that, you take that pressure off. But most people, even in a simple thing like that, most people won't even dive into full understanding. And so they begin with all of the rhetoric that's been passed down. I want to shift gears a little bit because One of the things that you posted the other day, and I was like, oh man, I forgot that about Brian. You said, I was previously agnostic, and then I began to practice Christianity. Can you talk about that journey and your respect for various religious beliefs?
Sure. I grew up in the not the Episcopal Church, the AME Church
Okay.
in rural Northwest Tennessee. Of course, very conservative in its approach, very conservative in how it viewed Christianity, morality, and so forth. But I began to see little things that began to bother me.
Mm-hmm.
For example, did Jesus really speak 17th century English? Was Jesus white? Why are all the angels white? You mean there are no black angels? There are no Asian angels? Um, how do Christians deal with the problem of evil and the problem of racism and sexism and homophobia? How do you deal with those particular issues? We didn't. We got the same old tired trope every single Sunday, and I'm like, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot do this.
Mm-hmm.
And, being open to ideas coming from the Buddha, ideas coming out of the Hindu tradition, out of the Baha'i tradition. I'm like, can these people all be wrong? Are we the
Right.
only ones that have the truth? And so for a while in my life, I just, when it came to Christianity, I just had problems with its premises from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I just started rejecting it. I
Mm-hmm.
started in the early 1990s, really starting to come back to it because I had to know that there was something of substance to it that I wasn't getting growing up.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I began to wrestle with the fact that, yeah, the Bible was written by imperfect people.
Mm-hmm.
It was written to address issues relating to their particular period. It was not
Mm-hmm.
written in English. A
Mm-hmm.
lot was lost in translation in
Mm-hmm.
the 17th century, when King James authorized the translation of the text out of the
Mm-hmm.
Vulgate. A lot of it was done deliberately. And so,
Deliberately.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I could go back and look at those issues, go back and look at those texts. And so I started wrestling with a Hebrew Bible text, Greek New Testament text, putting it into context, putting it into different categories, looking at the history behind it. And I was a student at SIU at this point. Then I
Mm-hmm.
began to really seriously begin to take my faith seriously and accept it, the foundational parts of Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
such as the role of the Trinity. I came to accept that particular doctrine and
Mm-hmm.
the atoning work of Christ on the cross. I came to accept that.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the other stuff I rejected then and I reject it now. This
Mm-hmm.
narrow morality,
Mm-hmm.
this idea of saying that we are holier than others, and if you disagree with us in the slightest, you're going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
I don't buy that. I never have. I've had a problem with it. And especially this notion that we're not supposed to question the pastors. We're not supposed to question the church leadership. We're not supposed to question what's written in the text. That's bull. That's what it's there for. It's there to have a
Exactly.
dialogue. Isaiah said, the prophet Isaiah wrote out over 3,000 years ago, come now and let us reason together.
Reason. Have communication.
Have communication, have dialogue. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not finding that in a lot of churches, Marcia, especially in our community.
Oh, especially in
Especially in
our
our
community. Part of being is, and I'm going to take us back a little bit,
mm-hmm.
when we were stolen and brought to this country, we had our own religion.
Mm-hmm. And
And we were
Christianity was in Africa long before the European missionaries came.
absolutely, absolutely. And so we were beaten, we were raped and brutalized to accept a religion called Christianity. And then the passed down of lineage of this abuse took place in our community, because I remember growing up in the Baptist church, and I could not understand for the life of me how it was so okay for us to not have and then take from our not have to the church so the pastor and his family could have. As a young
Yeah.
girl, I could not accept that. When I was married to a former pastor. He passed last year, I believe it was. We divorced because I told him I will not align with these principles of manipulating people to bring something to the church when you've already shown that you can't be trusted with the stuff that they already bring into the church. So you got people running around in bondage, trying to say, I'm bringing this and I'm doing this, and they're leaving God out of it. What are your thoughts about it? Because I just feel like the bondage that church puts us in the Black community, it dams up our ability to think and actually develop a relationship with the Creator. What's your thoughts?
We see God as a cosmic Santa Claus, and we
Mm-hmm.
tend to look at God from a transactional perspective, that if I'm a good little boy, if I'm a good little girl, if I tithe, knowing I got to pay my bills, knowing I got to feed my family, but if I tithe, then God is going to give me whatever I want. And all you're doing when you quote unquote tithe like that, first, you're depriving your family. That's not Christian. That's not moral. That's not ethical. And you're giving to these pastors and these religious leaders so that they could live in the lap of luxury. There was this series that my wife watched on the OWN network, and the name of the show escapes me now. Keith David was in it, Lynn Whitfield.
I can't think of the name, but I know the show that you're talking about.
But I was looking at the way that the pastor was idolized in the lavish lifestyle that they led. And I kept wondering to myself, how many people in his congregation came there by public transportation because they can't afford a car?
That part. But we see that in these larger churches now.
And
And
some of
don't
the
get me
smaller
wrong, I'm not
ones.
talking about the larger churches because, it's whatever. But I do know, whether large or small, there has always been people that believed in the process of church
Mhm.
that will always leave out hurt. Because I remember being a single parent and needed a one-time assistance with paying utilities.
Okay.
And when the deacon showed up with the funds, I'm a young mother. He thought I was supposed to sleep with him for the funds to pay my utility bill. And I looked at him and I said, there's not an ounce of desperation in me.
Man.
If my lights got cut off today, I still would know I never laid with you. And I saw all of those type of things going on, again, in small churches and in big churches. And when we think about the abuse, I have so many clients with church hurt right now.
Yes. Yes.
And so my question would be to you, historically, the church has played a part in the Black community. How do you think it's impacted the mental health of the Black community?
Probably not in a good way, because I bet there are thousands, I would dare say millions of stories just like the one you told. First of all, I'm trying to figure out this deacon who propositioned you like that. What Bible was he reading from to give him an excuse or a reason to approach
They
you in
weren't
an
reading
awful
from
and
the Bible.
disrespectful way like that?
Well, here's the truth. The pastor was doing it as well.
See?
So it was a setup in leadership in order to sow their oats, to get another notch on the belt.
And sadly enough, I have seen instances like that among certain pastors, the way that they proposition different women in the church, especially the younger ones, the more vulnerable ones, the single women, sometimes the married ones, all in the name of faith. And they abuse their authority because they're up there, they're dressed up, they have on this robe, they have this platform, they have this charisma, they're able to project it. Not a lot of Black men are able to project that kind of power, and they
Mhm.
use that to their advantage. And I can imagine, even though I'm not a mental health professional, I can imagine it has done a devastating number
Mhm.
on the African American community. And it's one big reason why a lot of our folks are so skeptical of religion to begin with, because some folks see it as the racket that it is.
Mhm. Oh, that's so good. The racket that it is. And so those in the audience that will listen to this, I need you all to understand that we're not saying don't commune with church. We're
No,
not saying to that every church is bad. What we're saying is that you have to be intentional with your personal relationship with your creator. If you are waiting on man, man is still man.
yep,
Man still operates under ego. Man still moves to whatever fear he can invoke, whatever gifts he can get out. Your personal relationship with the creator, like Brian said, he had to get to the point of asking the questions that it didn't make sense.
right.
And your truth is, even from an antagonistic state, your faith never stopped. You actually knew that there was a creator. What you didn't align with was all of the stuff that holds people back.
That's right.
That's huge.
It is. And I belong to a church that most people would say is boring.
Mm,
And yeah, compared to some of the other churches in the past I've attended, that's probably about right. And I'm not saying the Episcopal Church is perfect. God knows it is not.
mm-hmm,
But at least there, I can actually hear myself think.
mm,
I can agree with or disagree with the pastor, and it's okay.
mm-hmm,
I can agree with or disagree with certain principles that are taught by the church, and it's okay.
mm-hmm.
And I don't leave there feeling like I'm going to go to hell because I have a different view.
And that to me is a win
Right.
because so many people, I look at church as an opportunity to gas up for the week. You
That's
go
right.
to the filling station, you replenish your fluids, you get your gas, you check the air in your tires, you go on about your business for the week. That's how I look at it.
I like that analogy.
But the problem is most people get there and they're already on empty and they leave on empty.
That's right. But they had a good time.
They had the singing was good
The singing was good. The preaching was good. They got to dance a little bit. They had a great time, though.
and still broken.
Yep.
Still can't, and this is from a therapeutic side of the house, still going home crying,
Mhm.
contemplating suicide,
Mhm.
anxious, high blood pressure, low blood pressure, diabetes, obese, underweight, lack of food, lack of stability, all of those things still come into play. What would be some things that you would say to the audience about really understanding history and religion and making their own decisions?
I would say that, and I heard Jeremiah Wright say this years ago, and he is exactly right. And this is particularly pertinent to our people. Every single word of scripture, from Genesis to Revelation, was written during a time when the people of promise were under some form of oppression.
Yeah.
Whether it was Assyrian oppression, Babylonian oppression, Roman oppression, Persian oppression, it was written under some particular period of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Start with that premise alone,
Yes.
and start with the fact that uh, this did not happen. None of the events in the Bible happened in a period where there were processed democracies, where people had the
Mm,
right to vote. They were governed by kings. There were no civil liberties guarantees there. You
mm-hmm.
could be stoned to death for disagreeing with what the priest had said. You could be
Mm-hmm.
stoned to death for violating minute offenses in the Mosaic law. And just work with that premise. Just start with that,
Mm-hmm.
and start with the fact that certain people were considered worthy and certain people were not.
Right.
And look at
Right.
how the religious and political leaders, how they treated the poor, and then look at how the prophets and look at how later Jesus addressed those questions with how we treat the least of these.
Mm.
And when you start working from that particular perspective, then yeah, the scriptures will come alive. But if you work from this perspective that God doesn't want me to drink a glass of wine, God doesn't want me to dance, God does not want me to enjoy intimacy.
Mhm.
And God decides who I'm going to enjoy intimacy with, and where, and when, and how, and in what manner. If you work from that perspective, you're going to constantly repeat the cycle of failure.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. And it's so true. And that's so opening. My hope is that our discussion will get people to have a conversation,
Exactly.
that they understand that you are not stuck in a box, regardless of how you were raised, regardless of what the country looks like and the abuse, espousing Christianity for the guide of rejecting people.
Hmm.
In my perspective, Christianity or Christ-like is love and
Yeah.
acceptance. I
And most
I
of the
don't.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Most of the religions of the world privilege the same thing:
Period.
love for God and love for each other. And that's a lesson that's often lost.
And it's lost because we then get into this structure of who's right or wrong. If you took time to really look at each foundational principle of religion, they all saying the same thing.
They are.
They're saying the same thing.
I just taught a unit in I teach a course called Religion in the United States. It's a
Mm-hmm.
history, religious studies course, history in the United States. We just finished up a unit on the Sikh tradition out of India, and that
Mm.
Nashville has a pretty substantial Sikh population.
Okay.
Um, the first time I heard of Sikhism, here again, looking at it from a narrow view, was when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. And so I
Mm.
assumed that religion was all about terrorism, and it was not. You have extremists in every religion. But when I started really breaking Sikhism down later, the one thing I love about that particular faith tradition is that it views the oneness of God and the oneness of humanity as linked, and the way that we should treat each other. This is why, if you're a hungry person and you go to a Sikh temple and you tell them your predicament, they will feed you, no questions asked. That's why I was and I said this to the class yesterday, I was very upset 11 years ago when that gunman went into that Sikh temple
Yes.
in Wisconsin and opened fire. They welcomed him as a fellow traveler. They
Mm-hmm.
welcomed him as a brother and showed him compassion and
Mm-hmm.
hospitality, and he repays them by killing them.
Yeah.
Uh, but the Sikh tradition and the Christian tradition of compassion and love and helping the least of these, that they come from the same exact source.
Yes.
And then when I get to the Baha'i tradition on Monday, Baha'u'llah was one of the great religious leaders of the 19th century, and he gets no love, he gets no airplay in
Nope.
most circles, because Baha'u'llah said that yes, there's the oneness of God, the oneness of humanity, that science and religion are not mutually exclusive, that they actually fit, that it's okay to believe in science, that
Mm-hmm.
it's okay not to subscribe to tension in politics and wars and who's right and who's wrong and the right to kill. I admire the teachings of Baha'u'llah and his predecessor, the Bab. So I'll be bringing that into the classroom starting on Monday. But I really think that a lot of Christians need to look at some of these other faith traditions and the teachings of these faith traditions, like Buddha. I think the
Yes.
Buddha was a brilliant man.
Me too.
Go back
Me
and
too.
look at some of the things he says about controlling desire and reducing suffering. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you've rejected your Christian faith. It means that you're actually expanding it to see what other faith
Mm-hmm.
traditions have said. And that can do nothing but help your own faith tradition. It can
And when
only
people
help your own
understand
faith
that,
journey.
well, nobody's telling people to ignore their belief system.
Right,
What we're saying is gain knowledge.
right.
When you gain knowledge You don't have to feel like you need to threaten people by burning and banning books.
Oh, thank you. That is a very disturbing trend. I thought we had left that behind in the 30s.
You know what? The one thing that I know for certain is history repeats itself when we don't address it. The
Yep.
fact
And
that they slowed down
yep.
on the conversation, it never was addressed because
Right.
it would have never been able to pop back up now in the 21st century about banning books. Absolutely absurd.
And see, part of this Christian nationalism that we're seeing in Florida, we're seeing in Texas and around the country, wants to limit discourse, ban books, keep people from addressing the right issues, all because they want to further a very narrow, conservative, honestly, white nationalist Christian agenda.
And it's
And they
actually
are
building on their
succeeding.
fear. It's
They're
their fear
winning.
of going away.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because statistically and numerically, that particular point of view is in decline all around the world. And they want to try to recoup and save that tradition by being so draconian in how they're doing it. It's happening here in the United States. It's happening all over the world, where we're starting to see these right-wing nationalist groups functioning under the guise of religion in order to preserve their way of life at the expense of the other. And this at this moment, I mean, it could reverse itself, but at this moment, they're winning in terms of the law, in terms of policy.
Yeah.
And I don't like it. I don't like it. I get angry every time I think about what's going on in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The fact that Ron DeSantis, for example, who calls himself a Christian, does not want slavery taught in a state where slavery was profitable and where Jim Crow definitely entrenched itself.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't want the descendants of those slaves or slave owners to know about that particular period. The question is why?
Mm-hmm.
And you got the divisive concepts law in our home state of Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you not want that story told, and who is benefiting from that?
Right.
That's the question no one's asking.
Well, and I tell people, I was at the VA the other day and we were talking about the Iowa passing the law that 14 and 15-year-olds can work overnight shifts and stuff like that. And they was like, what are your thoughts? I said, follow the money. Anything you want to know that's going on in America, follow the money. The money is going to tell the story. All the years I spent in IRS as a criminal investigator, I would tell my employees, don't ask all these questions, follow the money. Where's the money? If you can find the money, we can find the issue. That's America. If you can find the money, you can find the why. And that's the thing that I'm hopeful that people will take as another message. Stop being so easily bamboozled and covered because of your own fear or your, I won't say lazy, but your comfort of taking other people's words for it. You're listening to people who are not scholars. You're discounting truth about situations. You won't even take the time out to learn more, because if you did, you will understand that we were actually a world built in love.
That's right.
And we've missed it.
We totally missed the mark. Totally missed the mark.
So what would be some closing statements you would like to say to our audience?
Agitate, agitate, agitate. Frederick Douglass was right.
Yeah.
Read, question authority, become engaged. Don't just, and here again, don't even just focus in on what's going on in your own bubble. Peek over those fences. See what other people are saying, even people with whom you might fundamentally disagree. Have empathy toward other people's views. Have empathy for people that you disagree with. You might find that you have more in common with them than you have differences with them. And I think once we begin to take down those walls of defensiveness and these walls of preserving our way of life and that our way of thinking that is right, and God is on our side only, once we begin to deconstruct those walls, I think that you'll see a shift in not just in this country, but you'll see it all over
The
the world.
world. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Listen, you all, go out to Facebook, Instagram, follow Dr. Clardy. Now, let me tell you something. All you strange people that like to get in people's inboxes and stuff, don't go in his inbox because he will blast you. Just follow him, get the information, identify. I'm like old people, eat the meat and chew out the bones. Grab
That's
what you
it.
can grab and go from there. I appreciate you, Brian, for being
Marcia, I
here, for
appreciate you.
saying yes. Listen, you all go out, listen to Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. You can find it on YouTube, Amazon, Apple, anywhere that you have your streaming apps. If you want to know more information, true information, I'm not talking about you trying to find something to pick on, but if you really want to tap into the mind of a historical scholar, Dr. Clardy is the man. Like, seriously. I don't do a lot of vouching for people, but I'm telling you, this
Wow.
man, this man has so much insight. Tap into it. Don't allow resources to go before you without being used. Thank you. Tell Sheila I said thank you.
I will. And Marcia, I really thank you. I'm very touched by what you said. I tried to do my best, and what you just said this then has made my day, and it's let me know that my work isn't in vain.
It is not in vain, brother. It is not in vain. I honor you. I honor your space. Thank you again for saying yes. And we'll have to do this again.
Absolutely. You just let me know when.
I will do that. Take good care. You enjoy your day.
You
Audience,
too.
go out, grab hold to Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. Go to the marciablaine.com website, grab some good information, the books, the whole 9 yards. Grab Dr. Clarity's books. You need some real resources in your life so that you can make the best decision possible. Take good care. Don't forget, we're normalizing freedom.